There's something about that first spark when you see a cosplay, or well, what's not yet a cosplay, but just the initial project or movie that inspires you, or character that excites you, that you can relate to. And I think that's what I felt when I first saw the Dora Milaje for the first time on screen with that epic soundtrack, and all of these women, various shades, various builds, and very strong and admirable. And that is one of the core things I think I look for in a character, a certain type of strength that I either want to develop in my own life or just to feel like sometimes. And the Dora really did that for me, especially seeing a Black woman or Black women uniting together for something. It's all I could ever want for us. And I find cosplay to be very, very personal in that way. I don't know if it's for everyone, but for me, I don't make a lot of costumes very quickly. But when I decide on a character or make room on my never-ending list for something, it has to mean a lot to me. I've had to either dive into the story, or the design has to speak volumes in its intricacy, and I want to either learn something new or portray this character that's given me so much joy. The research process, honestly, I think I find the most fun, besides learning the new skill. And that's because the research part is really just you enjoying the character even more in depth, in this sort of more exciting role of like, okay, why did they choose these colors, or why did they choose this beading, and what does it mean? What did the designer think when she or he created this, or they created these things? And you get to get in the mind of the problem solving that they had to go through just to create this beautiful piece that inspired you. It could have been on screen for a few seconds. I know plenty of cosplayers who saw a singular dress that may have just been used for the advertisement. You never see it in the movie, but that alone was like, that represents the character to me. As far as research goes, it's just about enjoying this and getting down to the overall scope and the big picture. Like, what does it look like all together? You start sketching that out. Or what does it look like on a minuscule level? And I think the Dora pretty much represents that for sure, because all together as a unit, you're thinking about it from a big picture. Big picture, the Doras are dressed in armor and they are here to protect Wakanda. That's big picture. When you see them coming, you see tens of thousands. There may only be 10 in the room, but they're supposed to be intimidating and royal. And even though they are incredibly stealthy and good at what they do, once you see them, you can't miss them. And I think that's just so incredible, especially when you tie it back into the African heritage of the designs. There's such a unique depth and history to the design itself. I mean, from the patterns on the fabrics, which required a lot of zooming in on the photos, or the beading itself and having to like crop out images of the different layers and pasting it together just so we could get the right pattern down. And I found it very empowering. Oh, okay, so this is how this connects here, and this is how this connects here, and then it's like you're on your own Sherlock mystery. How does this create the whole piece? And how does the harness work? Or how would you get dressed? I mean, just thinking about how do you actually put it on? Not just the details, which you could just drool over with the beautiful colors and the vibrancy, but how do you just wear it? and in a way that's comfortable, in a way that makes you feel strong. I mean, the harness itself, if you do it right, it gives you a posture to let you know, like, oh, well, I'm a warrior now. You know, you sit up straighter, you embody the movement and the walk of the character. The jingles on the skirt, the little details there on the red skirt, they make just a slight chinging sound when you walk. And imagine a whole army of Doras, and you hear that ching, ching, ching as they walk. I mean, how impactful is that? You know, it comes down to even the sound that an outfit makes or a garment makes. And you're thinking about all of these things and how it tells a story, and how you yourself, when you put the costume on, how that brings you alive. You have become a part of this world now. Even if you are portraying a character, even if it's a main character or a side character or anyone specific, a named character, it's still you. And I think that really motivates me, and it helps, honestly helps deal with the lack of the need for perfection, because at the end of the day, what you are doing in your cosplay is going to be different from the other person who may be doing the same character, because it's still you. You have to wear, you have to show up in your essence and in your greatness and be present in their costume. When researching the Doras, it definitely gave a very personal experience, you know, learning about how to bead, what my hands could actually do. Because before then, I wasn't beading. I was definitely just a seamstress. I was sewing, I was learning basics of sewing, maybe some corsetry here and there, but I hadn't challenged myself in such a way where I was taking on new skills entirely, because I avoided hand sewing. So imagine me saying, like, yes, I'm going to hand bead this entire garment because I loved it that much. And I think that's an incredible thing about cosplay. I mean, the fact that it would challenge you because you love something so much, even if it's unrelated to the skill, because you love it so much, you're willing to put aside your concerns of failure or being unable to do something and try it anyway. And I know that was a big thing for all of us when we when we did it together. But now I try and be with other things, fantasy, costumes. I mean, it just adds more depth and elements and uniqueness because I learned the skill because of something I just adored. Other things I learned to print my own fabric because of this costume. I figured it out because I said, I want to bring this to life and I want others to be able to bring this to life. And I think that's just being able to empower others to be and feel powerful and embody a part of themselves that they thought they couldn't, that brings some sort of confidence to them. I know cosplay speaks to many when it says it helps me to be confident. It was rare that I saw someone who looked authentically like me, or a place where I could belong naturally, without question of my identity. And I could see myself fitting in there without a second thought. It was just normal. And in many places of society, that's not always the case, especially for Black women. We don't always get to see ourselves in fantasy or as a superhero. And thankfully that's changing even more now since the release of Black Panther, and we're seeing it more often. And I love that. I love that this initial spark and the power and the movement and the beauty and the just greatness that was that movie allowed me to love more costumes and people who looked like me in main media and mainstream media. And the biggest thing is, because I know I'm able to see this, I know children who look like me are able to see this and love themselves and see themselves. So when I show up as the Dora Milaje or Shuri to a convention or in a charity event, and there's that one child who, may be looking around and waves hello to the other characters, but then sees me dressed as someone they admire, and their eyes are just wide and they run over, and it's like they can't even get it out fast enough. They rush in for a hug, and how are you supposed to take that? You just try to be the absolute best in character you can be, because for them, this is a powerful moment. It's a reminder of how wonderful they are just by being themselves and what they could grow up to be. So we can get into a little bit of how I made the costume and help do the design and research behind, or the backwards engineering behind creating the Dora. So if you start off with the bodice and the leggings, those are all printed fabrics. I pulled inspiration from the original costumes and tried to figure out a pattern that worked well for a multitude of body types. And I designed it on Photoshop at the time. I highly recommend Adobe Illustrator if you're going to do a lot of little shapes and repeating patterns. But that was a learning lesson for me later on, as I created more and more materials in my own work. For Shuri, I've done this for. I've done it for an Ahsoka as well. So it's a very helpful skill, and I really, really enjoy it. And so I'm so glad that Dora Milaje gave me that to learn, because I can apply it to more now. And beading is interesting because you don't have the specifications of the beads and the sizes. So definitely get your ruler out and take a lot of measurements, and have your reference photos at the correct sizing so you can compare sizes to how it might fit on your body. It would help to have a printer if you can print out your patterns so you can see how it compares to how it's going to fit you. And that's how I did the beading when I was researching beads. And I tried to find things that were close, but it's impossible to source exactly where they got it from unless you have firsthand information. So pictures are going to be your best friends. Direct conversations from the designer or anybody who's worked on that costume on the set. But that may be more rare because they are under NDAs. As far as the harness, that was made out of pleather and sewed on our machines. First of all, get the right needles and get the right thread. That is going to save you a lot of time, and maybe some non-stick foot, like a sewing foot. And we did a lot of patterning. If you have a bust or a bodice that is your size, or you can actually tape yourself. You can put some saran wrap and then some duct tape over it and draw out your shapes, like the base shapes that you want, and then cut it out and then clean up the lines and create your own pattern that way. That's sort of what we did for the harnesses. So what's fascinating about the Dora Milaje as a design, the armor is not your typical armor that you would see. I know most of, like, especially Western armor is the metallic sort of knight in shining armor situation, but the Dora Milaje armor is so cool because it's also part of like the authenticity of the beading and the harness with all of these textured details and the interesting shoulder pieces, which is part of the more metallic and shinier version of this armor. But the fact that it has this sort of feminine quality without taking away from the protectiveness of the armor, as well as the agility, which is super important in armor as well, depending on the type of fighter that you are. For the shoulder armor, I actually ended up having to remake it because I wanted something lighter that allowed me that agility that you saw in the movie, which makes a lot more sense now in the learning process. So I ended up making it out of craft foam and just using some contact cement and this fantastic mirror paint and painting it up in that way, and using some cording, some silver cording to create the minor details because it's difficult to get craft foam in such a small capacity. So the silver cording really allowed me to have like just these really ornate, beautiful detailing, and you could just glue it on with some super glue. And that was just really, really cool because once I put the armor on, this new armor with the costume that I had made in 2018, it just brought a whole new life to it. I could move even better than when I wore it that time. And that was even more exciting because it looked more like metal than the first time I made it. And not only is that proof of how magical just practicing and trying things out and experimenting is, it's also just showing how much I've grown as a costumer and what I've learned and how much the cosplay community has grown, because there's such a plethora of information out there to make more realistic garments and also allow you for movement and breathability. The beading is such an interesting development because it's so tedious and a personal experience to make that particular part of the armor. And yet it's also supposed to be this very strong protective, as well as almost a fierceness to it, because when you see all of that red and the detail and the beading and all of that movement, it almost shocks whoever's being attacked, I suppose, or shocks the viewer when they're all moving together in tandem and working together, and all of this ornate detail is flying and whipping past the camera. And I just think that is just such an epic take for this sort of Afrofuturistic warriors that protect Wakanda without question. And I really, really, really have found that so motivating for me, because I'm not much for like a lot of big armor. I love the movement because in my, particularly in my costuming and my practice in photo shoots, I tend to like to move a lot to create more action shots. I think those would just make me feel really good and challenge my body to like go into this epicness and become this character and move like this character might. And I think that the subtlety of this particular armor has allowed me to do so. I will always be grateful to Black Panther and Ruth Carter and all of these people who made this fantasy world come true and bringing these incredible, powerful warriors and strong visual impacts and something I couldn't have imagined for myself and for others, and making it a community experience, being surrounded by other people from the Black Panther world and seeing all these beautiful colors and shades of people and feeling strong within that connectivity and standing together in this sort of epicness. And I am so grateful for that strength and that beauty and that empowerment. And it's why I love what I do. I love cosplay and being inspired and creating something that no one else could expect, even ourselves.